The Mechanized Confusion Apparatus. Part 1. The Architecture of Confusion. Imagine standing before an immense machine. Its gears turn endlessly, its belts spin, its levers rise and fall in perfect rhythm, never resting and never breaking. Now imagine that this machine manufactures not steel or electricity, but confusion. The idea seems absurd at first. We usually think of confusion as accidental, the product of missing information or genuine complexity. But what if confusion is not always accidental? What if, under certain conditions, it can be systematically produced, amplified, and sustained until it becomes the very environment through which a person experiences reality? Philosophers and psychologists have long converged on a key insight. The mind is not a passive observer of reality, it is an active constructor of it. The brain organizes billions of pieces of information into a coherent model of the world. It filters, predicts, and constantly updates itself. Modern neuroscience supports this view. It describes the brain less as a camera that records the world and more as a prediction engine, one that anticipates experience, compares it to incoming sensory data, and adjusts when reality diverges from expectation. Much of what we call perception is simply the brain's best interpretation of the information available at any given moment. This capacity has allowed humanity to survive for hundreds of thousands of years. We recognize faces instantly. We detect danger before consciously understanding why. We navigate crowds without calculating every step. The mind is always searching for order because order enables prediction and survival. But every strength carries a corresponding vulnerability. The same mind that seeks order is deeply unsettled by disorder. Psychologists have long observed that unresolved uncertainty captures attention, an unfinished conversation lingers, an unanswered question resurfaces, a contradiction demands resolution. The mind resists loose ends because uncertainty consumes mental resources, and it prompts us to replay conversations, reconsider decisions, and search for new information until clarity is restored. Most of the time this process works. Questions receive answers. Problems find solutions. Confusion gives way to understanding. But what happens when understanding never arrives? What happens when every answer creates another contradiction, when every explanation leads to 3 more questions, when uncertainty becomes permanent rather than temporary? At that moment, confusion stops being an isolated experience. It becomes a psychological environment. This is where the mechanized confusion apparatus begins to emerge, a machine whose purpose is not to produce knowledge but uncertainty. Every gear generates another contradiction. Every contradiction redirects attention. Every distraction prevents the mind from stepping back far enough to see the whole system. Its gears are contradiction. Its belts are distraction. Its engine is uncertainty. Its fuel is human attention, and its only product is confusion itself. This principle extends far beyond individual psychology. Political propaganda has often relied on overwhelming people with conflicting narratives until certainty becomes difficult to achieve. Advertisers manufacture dissatisfaction before presenting products as solutions. Manipulative personalities redirect conversations away from observable behavior and toward endless interpretation. Modern information systems bombard us with more opinions, headlines, and competing explanations than any previous generation has encountered. These systems differ in purpose, but they often produce the same effect. Attention fragments, certainty becomes elusive, reality begins to feel increasingly difficult to grasp. None of this means complexity itself is the enemy. Reality is genuinely complex. Scientific discovery regularly replaces old assumptions. Honest people disagree, and uncertainty is an essential part of intellectual growth. But there is a profound difference between complexity and manufactured confusion. Complexity rewards careful investigation and gradually reveals deeper understanding. Manufactured confusion punishes investigation and continually postpones understanding. Complexity expands awareness. Manufactured confusion exhausts it. Confusion, in other words, is not always evidence that reality is impossible to understand. Sometimes it is evidence that our attention has become trapped inside a system that continuously redirects it away from clarity. Every machine has an architecture, every architecture has a designer, every design serves a purpose. Before we can understand how confusion shapes our beliefs, our decisions, our relationships, and even our perception of reality, we must first learn to recognize the machinery itself. Only then can we ask the question that truly matters. Who or what is operating the machine? Part 2. Manufacturing confusion. Once we understand that confusion can become an environment rather than a passing emotion, another question follows. How is that environment created? How does the human mind, shaped by millions of years of evolution to recognize patterns and organize experience, become trapped inside a state of continual uncertainty? The answer begins with one of the most remarkable characteristics of human consciousness, the mind's desperate need for coherence. Psychologists have long recognized that human beings are natural pattern-seeking creatures who do not simply observe isolated events, but connect them into stories. These narratives provide stability. They allow us to predict what happens next, make decisions with confidence, and move through life with a sense of orientation. When the story makes sense, the mind rests. When it breaks apart, the mind begins searching. This search is neither irrational nor unusual. It is one of the fundamental operations of human intelligence, evident whenever we replay conversations, reconsider decisions, or imagine alternative explanations in an attempt to restore order to an experience that no longer fits together. Normally, this process leads toward understanding, but under certain conditions, it leads somewhere else entirely. Imagine a machine whose only purpose is to interrupt every attempt the mind makes to establish coherence. It rearranges each pattern the moment it's discovered. It introduces a new contradiction the moment a conclusion is reached. It turns every answer into another question and every explanation into another explanation. Rather than letting the mind complete the puzzle, the machine quietly removes another piece, and the search continues indefinitely. This is the beginning of mechanized confusion, and the machine operates chiefly through contradiction. Contradictions are psychologically expensive because the brain cannot comfortably ignore information that appears incompatible. Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance demonstrated that people experience genuine tension when holding two beliefs that cannot both be true. The mind instinctively works to eliminate that tension by searching for an explanation that restores consistency. Most of us know this feeling. Someone tells us one thing but behaves another way. A trusted institution contradicts itself. A public figure reverses position overnight. A relationship repeatedly violates the expectations it claims to uphold. Immediately, the mind begins asking what changed, what it's missing, how both things can be true. These are signs of healthy cognition. The problem arises when the contradictions never resolve, when each one simply generates another, leaving the mind permanently suspended between competing realities it cannot organize. Gregory Bateson explored a related phenomenon in his work on the double bind, where every available response becomes incorrect. Speak honestly and create conflict. Stay silent and the silence becomes evidence against you. Defend yourself and be accused of defensiveness. Accept the criticism and your acceptance becomes proof you deserved it. Every possible decision reinforces the very problem it's meant to solve. The machine has no exit. Every road leads back inside. A second mechanism operates alongside this one. Attention itself becomes fragmented. The brain has limited attentional resources, and every unresolved contradiction, every distraction, and every emotional reaction competes for them, pulling awareness away from the broader pattern and toward immediate conflicts and constantly shifting details. A distracted mind rarely recognizes the architecture surrounding it. Modern information environments amplify this constantly. News cycles compete through urgency. Social media rewards outrage because it spreads faster than reflection. Advertising manufactures dissatisfaction before offering solutions. Political rhetoric simplifies complex issues into narratives that encourage loyalty over understanding. These systems don't operate identically, but they converge on the same result. Attention fragments. reflection shortens, reaction replaces observation. Researchers studying information overload have reached a comparable conclusion. Beyond a certain point, additional information stops improving judgment and starts reducing our ability to separate the meaningful from the noise. The mechanized confusion apparatus thrives under exactly these conditions. It doesn't need to hide reality. It only needs to surround reality with enough competing interpretations that recognizing it becomes difficult. This is partly why confusion feels so exhausting. The brain keeps working long after the external situation has ended, replaying conversations, reconstructing arguments, and multiplying alternative explanations, because no conclusion ever feels sufficiently complete. Slowly, the goal itself shifts. You become less concerned with what is true and more concerned with finding certainty, and these are not the same pursuit. Truth requires patience. Certainty demands immediate closure. The apparatus exploits this difference constantly, encouraging quick conclusions where patience is needed, emotional reactions where observation is required, and endless analysis where a simple pattern would reveal far more. Perhaps the machine's greatest achievement isn't convincing people of false ideas. It's keeping them too occupied to notice the larger pattern operating around them. Every contradiction becomes another gear. Every distraction becomes another belt. Every emotional reaction becomes another source of fuel. The more attention confusion receives, the larger the apparatus grows, while the less likely we become to step back and examine the system producing it. Confusion, in the end, is rarely defeated by collecting more answers. It is defeated by recognizing the machinery that keeps manufacturing the questions. Part 3. Living inside the machine. The most dangerous aspect of prolonged confusion is that it rarely feels dramatic. It happens gradually. At first, you simply spend more time thinking about unresolved problems, replaying conversations after they've ended, questioning decisions already made, and searching for explanations that always seem just out of reach. Eventually, the search itself becomes a habit, quietly woven into the architecture of an ordinary day. The mind stays active long after events have ended because it keeps trying to organize experiences that refuse to fit together. Neuroscience suggests that uncertainty demands attention in a literal, physiological sense. The brain evolved to reduce unpredictability because forecasting the future has always been essential to survival. When uncertainty persists without resolution, the body responds as though danger is still present. Cortisol rises, sleep shortens, vigilance increases. Mental energy that might otherwise go toward purposeful action is instead consumed by constant analysis, circling the same unanswered questions in the hope that the next thought will finally deliver clarity. It rarely does. Over time, this produces predictable psychological consequences. Decision fatigue appears because even small choices start to feel uncertain. Confidence weakens because every conclusion is re-examined before it can settle. Rumination replaces reflection, and anxiety replaces curiosity. A person who once trusted their own judgment begins relying more heavily on outside authorities to interpret events, explain motives, and define what is real. This isn't because they've become less capable of thinking. It's because thinking, under these conditions, has stopped producing results. Psychologist Martin Seligman observed something remarkably similar in his research on learned helplessness. When repeated efforts to solve a problem consistently fail to change the outcome, most people eventually stop trying. This isn't from laziness. It's a rational, if painful, recalibration. If nothing I do seems to matter, the mind concludes, then stopping is safer than continuing. The same pattern appears inside prolonged confusion. When repeated attempts to understand a situation keep dissolving into new contradictions, many people eventually abandon the search for clarity altogether. They become passive not because they lack intelligence, but because their intelligence has been asked to solve an unsolvable puzzle one too many times. This is the apparatus at its most effective, not when it convinces you of something false, but when it exhausts your capacity to keep asking whether something is true. A confused mind becomes increasingly occupied with surviving uncertainty rather than investigating it. Attention fragments into smaller pieces. Critical thinking slows for lack of stable ground to think from. Emotional reactions become easier to provoke because a tired mind reaches for the nearest available feeling rather than the most accurate one. Independent judgment quietly gives way to dependence on whoever or whatever appears most certain, a leader, a partner, an algorithm, an ideology. It hardly matters which. What matters is that the exhausted mind, having spent its resources chasing contradictions that never resolved, becomes willing to trade the burden of thinking for the relief of being told. This is how confusion becomes control, not through force, but through fatigue. The machine doesn't need to lock a single door. It only needs to keep every hallway leading back to the same room, until eventually you stop looking for an exit and start looking for someone to tell you where you are. Part 4. Returning to clarity. Every machine can be understood, and every system, no matter how complex, can be observed. The first step toward escaping confusion is recognizing what clarity is not. It rarely arrives through greater emotional intensity, louder certainty, or faster conclusions. It arrives through slower, more patient observation. Rather than chasing every contradiction as it appears, we begin searching for what repeats. Rather than reacting to isolated events, we examine what remains consistent across time. The world's great philosophical traditions arrived at remarkably similar conclusions, despite emerging in different centuries and different corners of the world. Socrates taught that clear thinking begins not with confident answers, but with honest questions, the willingness to say, "I do not yet know long enough to actually find out." The Buddha encouraged patient observation of the mind before accepting its conclusions, recognizing that much of what feels like insight is simply a passing state mistaken for permanent truth. The Stoics emphasized a single discipline distinction. Separate what lies within your control from what does not, and stop spending your limited attention on the latter. Modern science insists that every belief remain provisional, open to revision the moment new evidence arrives. This isn't a weakness. It's science's greatest strength. Though these traditions differ in method, language, and era, each converges on the same underlying discipline. Observe before concluding. Modern psychology offers a strikingly similar prescription. Daniel Kahneman's research into human judgment revealed that our fastest thinking is also our most easily manipulated. It is quick, intuitive, and prone to error precisely because it feels so certain, while slower, more deliberate thinking is less satisfying in the moment, but far more reliable over time. Slowing the thinking process down, reducing unnecessary information rather than accumulating more of it, examining evidence rather than assumptions, and distinguishing facts from interpretations, and interpretations from feelings mistaken for facts, all become essential disciplines. So does becoming aware of the emotional reasoning and cognitive biases quietly shaping conclusions before they're even consciously reached, and learning to tolerate uncertainty without rushing toward the first explanation that offers temporary comfort. A clear mind is rarely the fastest mind. It is almost always the most patient one. Perhaps the greatest shift occurs the moment we stop asking "what should I believe?" and start asking "what does the evidence consistently show?" Patterns reveal reality more reliably than isolated moments ever can. Consistency reveals character more accurately than any single promise, and observation, practiced patiently enough, gradually replaces speculation altogether. The mechanized confusion apparatus depends entirely on constant distraction to keep running, and it cannot survive sustained attention directed at itself. Clarity begins the moment awareness returns to reality, not the reality of the next headline, the next contradiction, the next emotional trigger, but the quieter, more consistent reality that was there all along, waiting underneath the noise. The machine doesn't lose its power through defeat, it loses its power through neglect. The moment we stop feeding it endless uncertainty and start cultivating careful observation instead, its gears slow, its belts loosen, and its engine, built entirely from borrowed attention, has nothing left to run on. Return, then, to the question that opened this journey. Who or what is operating the machine? Perhaps the most unsettling answer is also the most liberating one. Often, no one is operating it at all. It runs on autopilot, sustained by nothing more than habit, incentive, and the accumulated weight of every mind that has ever fed it without noticing. It requires no villain, only distraction, repeated often enough, for long enough, by enough people, that the pattern becomes invisible simply by being everywhere. Which means the machine can also be starved, not through a single dramatic act of defiance, but through something far quieter. Attention, reclaimed, one observation at a time, one patient question at a time. One moment of stepping back far enough to finally see the shape of the whole system. Perhaps wisdom has never been the accumulation of more information. Perhaps it is simply learning how to think clearly in a world increasingly designed to make clarity difficult. The machine is still running somewhere, right now, in this very moment. The only question that remains is how much of your attention it will get today.